The sun was setting over Maple Street, painting the quiet neighborhood in golden light. Officer Danny Brooks sat in his patrol car, watching expensive houses with perfect lawns. He'd been patrolling this area for 3 years, and he knew who belonged here and who didn't. That's when he saw the black Mercedes with dark windows driving slowly down the street. The car wasn't speeding or breaking any laws, but something about it bothered Danny. Maybe it was the tinted windows, or maybe it was just a feeling he couldn't shake. That car doesn't belong here, Danny muttered to himself as he started his engine. The Mercedes continued at a normal pace, stopping at every stop sign and using turn signals properly, but Danny had already made up his mind. He flipped on his lights and pulled the car over near a bus stop. The Mercedes pulled over smoothly and came to a complete stop. Danny took his time getting out of his car, adjusting his belt and putting on his serious face. This was his neighborhood to protect, and he took that job seriously. As he walked up to the driver's window, Danny noticed his reflection in the dark glass. He was a big man with short brown hair and cold blue eyes. People usually got nervous when they saw him coming, and he liked it that way. The window rolled down slowly, revealing a well-dressed black man who looked to be in his 50s. He wore a nice suit and tie, had graying hair at his temples, and seemed completely calm. His hands were visible on the steering wheel, and he looked straight ahead. "Good evening, officer," the man said politely. His voice was steady and respectful. Danny didn't return the greeting. Instead, he leaned down and stared into the car. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" "No, sir, I don't. I was driving the speed limit and following all traffic laws." Danny's jaw tightened. He didn't like it when people questioned him, even politely. "You were driving suspiciously slow for this area. People around here don't drive like that unless they're looking for something." The driver remained calm. "I was simply being careful, officer. I always drive cautiously in residential areas. License and registration. Now." The man slowly reached into his jacket pocket, moving deliberately so the officer could see everything he was doing. He pulled out a leather wallet and carefully removed his driver's license. Then he opened his glove compartment and took out his registration and insurance papers. Danny snatched the documents and studied them under his flashlight. The name on the license read, Thomas Washington. The address was in this same neighborhood just a few blocks away. "So you live around here?" Danny asked, his tone suggesting he didn't believe it. "Yes, sir. For about 8 years now." Danny looked back at the documents, then at Thomas, then at the expensive car. Something still didn't feel right to him. This man was too calm, too polite, too comfortable. In Danny's experience, people who belonged in this neighborhood didn't act like this during traffic stops. "Step out of the vehicle," Danny ordered, his hand moving closer to his weapon. Thomas looked surprised. "Is there a problem, officer?" "I've provided my documents and I haven't broken any laws. I said step out of the vehicle. Don't make me repeat myself." Thomas unbuckled his seatbelt slowly and opened his door. He was tall and moved with quiet dignity, keeping his hands visible at all times. Even though he was clearly confused by what was happening, he didn't show any anger or frustration. "Is there something specific you're looking for, officer?" Thomas asked as he stood beside his car. Danny walked around the Mercedes, shining his flashlight through the windows. The car was spotless inside, with leather seats and expensive-looking dashboard. Everything was perfectly clean and organized. "Nice car," Danny said, but his tone made it sound like an accusation. "Must have cost a lot of money." "I work hard for what I have," Thomas replied simply. Danny stopped walking and stared at Thomas. There was something about this man's calmness that irritated him. Most people were nervous or scared during traffic stops, but Thomas seemed almost confident, like he knew something Danny didn't. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area," Danny lied. "Cars driving around slowly, looking at houses. You match the description." Thomas frowned slightly. "What description would that be, officer?" Danny realized he'd painted himself into a corner, but he was too proud to back down now. "Just stay right there while I check your information." He walked back to his patrol car, taking the documents with him. Inside his car, Danny ran Thomas's license through the system. Everything came back clean. No warrants, no criminal history, not even a parking ticket. Thomas Washington was exactly who he said he was, living exactly where he said he lived. But instead of feeling relieved, Danny felt more suspicious. In his mind, everyone had something to hide. If someone appeared too clean, too perfect, it usually meant they were hiding something big. Danny got out of his car and walked back to Thomas, who was still standing patiently beside the Mercedes. The man hadn't moved an inch, keeping his hands visible and maintaining his respectful posture. "Your record's clean," Danny admitted grudgingly, handing back the license. "Thank you, officer. May I get back in my car now?" Danny should have said yes. The traffic stop was over, and he had no legal reason to detain Thomas any longer. But something inside him wasn't satisfied. He felt like he was missing something important, and that feeling gnawed at him. "Actually," Danny said, stepping closer, "I'm going to need to search your vehicle." Thomas's calm expression changed for the first time. "Search my car? On what grounds?" "I smell marijuana coming from your vehicle." It was another lie. Danny knew it, and from the look in Thomas's eyes, Thomas knew it too. But Danny was betting that Thomas wouldn't fight him on it. "Officer, I don't use drugs and there's nothing illegal in my car. I do not consent to a search." Danny's face hardened. Those words, "I do not consent," were like a red flag to him. In his experience, only guilty people refuse searches. "Well, that's too bad," Danny said, walking toward the Mercedes. "Because I've got probable cause now." Thomas took a step forward. "Officer, you cannot search my vehicle without my consent or a warrant." "I know my rights." "Your rights?" Danny spun around, his face flushing red. "Let me tell you something about your rights. Your rights are whatever I say they are right now." The two men stared at each other in the growing darkness. Thomas remained calm but firm, while Danny's anger was building like a storm. Neither man was willing to back down, and the tension in the air was thick enough to cut. This traffic stop was about to become something much bigger than either of them expected. Danny's face was getting redder by the minute. He wasn't used to people standing up to him, especially not during a traffic stop. Most drivers just went along with whatever he wanted, but Thomas was different. Thomas knew the law, and he wasn't afraid to use it. "Look here," Danny said, pointing his finger at Thomas. "I've been doing this job for 15 years. I know when someone's hiding something and you're hiding something." Thomas kept his voice level and respectful. "Officer, I'm not hiding anything. I'm a law-abiding citizen who is simply driving home from work. I've shown you my identification and I've been cooperative. But I cannot allow you to search my car without proper legal justification." Those words hit Danny like a slap in the face. Nobody talked to him like that. Nobody used fancy legal words or questioned his authority. This man was making him look foolish, and Danny couldn't stand it. "You think you're smart, don't you?" Danny stepped closer, trying to intimidate Thomas with his size. "You think you know more than me?" "I simply know my constitutional rights," Thomas replied calmly. Danny laughed, but it wasn't a friendly sound. "Constitutional rights? Out here on the street, I decide what rights you have." Without waiting for a response, Danny walked over to the Mercedes and opened the driver's door. Thomas moved quickly but peacefully to block his path. "Officer, I'm telling you again, I do not consent to this search. You're violating my Fourth Amendment rights." "Move aside or I'll arrest you for obstruction," Danny threatened. Thomas didn't move aside, but he didn't get physical either. He stood his ground with quiet dignity. "Then arrest me, officer, but don't pretend this search is legal." Danny was trapped. He could arrest Thomas, but then he'd have to explain to his supervisor why he arrested a man who hadn't committed any crime. He could walk away, but that would mean admitting he was wrong. Or he could push forward with the illegal search and hope Thomas wouldn't file a complaint. Pride won out over common sense. "That's it," Danny said. "You're being detained for suspicious behavior." He pushed past Thomas and began searching the car. Thomas stepped back but didn't stop talking. "Officer, what's your badge number?" Thomas asked. Danny ignored him and started going through the glove compartment. He found insurance papers, the car manual, and some receipts, but nothing illegal. "What's your name, officer?" Thomas tried again. "Shut up," Danny muttered, moving to search under the seats. Thomas pulled out his phone. "I'm recording this interaction for my own protection." Danny spun around. "Put that phone away or I'll confiscate it as evidence." "Evidence of what crime?" Thomas asked. "I haven't been charged with anything." Danny was getting more frustrated by the minute. He'd searched the front seat, the back seat, and the trunk. He'd looked in every compartment and under every floor mat. The car was completely clean, not even a piece of trash, let alone anything illegal. But instead of admitting his mistake, Danny kept searching. He went through the same places twice, 3 times, hoping to find something, Anything that would justify his actions. "This is harassment," Thomas said quietly. "You pulled me over without cause, you're searching my car without permission, and you're detaining me illegally." "I'll tell you what's illegal," Danny snapped, slamming the glove compartment shut. "What's illegal is a guy like you driving around this neighborhood at night, looking at houses, planning God knows what." Thomas's calm expression flickered for just a moment. "A guy like me?" Danny realized what he'd just said, but it was too late to take it back. The words hung in the air between them like smoke. "You know what I mean," Danny said, but his voice was quieter now. "No, officer. I don't know what you mean. Please explain what you mean by a guy like me." Danny's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. He couldn't say what he really meant without getting himself in serious trouble. But Thomas already knew exactly what he meant. "Let me ask you something," Thomas said, his voice still calm, but now carrying an edge. "If I were a white man in a suit driving the same car in the same neighborhood, would you have pulled me over?" Danny didn't answer, but his silence spoke volumes. "Would you have demanded to search my car?" Still no answer. "Would you have called me suspicious for driving carefully in a residential area?" Danny slammed the car door shut. "I don't have to listen to this garbage." "It's not garbage, officer. It's the truth, and we both know it." Danny walked around the car one more time, desperately looking for anything he might have missed. He checked the spare tire compartment, felt around the edges of the seats, and even looked in the air vents. Nothing. Meanwhile, Thomas stood watching, his phone still recording everything. He wasn't angry or shouting or causing a scene. He was just quietly documenting what was happening to him. "Find anything?" Thomas asked when Danny finally stopped searching. Danny's jaw was clenched so tight it hurt. "Not yet." "Not yet? How long do you plan to detain me, officer?" That was a good question. Danny had been searching for almost 20 minutes now. He had no evidence of any crime, no probable cause, and no legal justification for keeping Thomas there any longer. But Danny's pride wouldn't let him admit defeat. In his mind, backing down now would make him look weak. It would mean this man had outsmarted him, and Danny couldn't accept that. "I'm calling for backup," Danny announced, walking back to his patrol car. "Backup for what?" Thomas called after him. "I'm not resisting, I'm not running, I'm standing here peacefully asking you to respect my rights." Danny grabbed his radio and called dispatch. "Unit 47 requesting backup at Maple Street and 3rd Avenue. I've got a suspicious subject who's being uncooperative." Thomas shook his head sadly. He'd been through situations like this before, but they never got easier. Being treated like a criminal for no reason was exhausting, especially when you were just trying to get home after a long day at work. As they waited for backup to arrive, Danny continued searching the car for the 4th time. He was becoming more aggressive now, tossing papers around and leaving fingerprints all over everything. "Officer," Thomas said quietly, "what happens when your backup gets here and realizes you've been detaining an innocent man illegally?" Danny pretended not to hear him, but the question hit home. What would happen when other officers arrived? What would he tell them? How would he explain why he'd been searching this car for half an hour without finding anything? For the first time since the traffic stop began, Danny started to wonder if maybe he'd made a mistake. But it was too late to turn back now. He could already see flashing lights in the distance heading their way. The situation was about to get a lot more complicated. 2 police cars pulled up with their lights flashing, casting red and blue shadows across the quiet street. Danny felt a wave of relief wash over him. Finally, he'd have some support in dealing with this difficult situation. The first officer out of the car was Lisa Martinez, a rookie who'd been on the force for only 6 months. She was young, eager, and still believed that police work was about helping people and protecting the community. Her training had taught her proper procedures, and she took those lessons seriously. The second officer was Sergeant Bill Thompson, a 20-year veteran who'd seen everything the job had to offer. He was Danny's supervisor, and he had a reputation for being fair but tough. Bill had worked with Danny before and knew he could be a hothead sometimes. "What's the situation here, Brooks?" Sergeant Thompson asked as he approached. Danny straightened up, trying to look professional. "I pulled over this suspect for suspicious driving behavior. He's been uncooperative and refuses to consent to a vehicle search." I detected the odor of marijuana coming from his car. Officer Martinez looked at Thomas, who was still standing calmly beside his Mercedes with his phone in his hand. She noticed that he was well-dressed, polite, and didn't look like he was on drugs or causing any trouble. Sergeant Thompson walked over to Thomas. "Sir, can you tell me what's happening here?" Thomas looked relieved to be talking to someone new. "Officer, I was driving home from work when this officer pulled me over. He claimed I was driving suspiciously, but I was following all traffic laws. He demanded to search my car without probable cause, and when I refused to consent, he searched it anyway. I have been detained here illegally for almost 30 minutes. Did you find anything in the search, Brooks?" Thompson asked. Danny's face flushed. "Not yet, but—" "Not yet?" Thompson interrupted. "How long have you been searching?" "About 25 minutes, sir." Thompson frowned. In 20 years of police work, he'd never seen a legal search take that long without finding anything. Either there was nothing to find or Danny was doing something wrong. Officer Martinez stepped closer to Thomas. "Sir, are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" "No, I'm fine, thank you for asking. But I would like to know why I'm still being detained. I've provided my identification, I've been cooperative, and no contraband has been found in my vehicle." Martinez looked at Danny with confusion. In her training, they'd learned that you couldn't detain someone indefinitely without probable cause. If no evidence was found after a reasonable search, the person should be free to go. "Brooks," Thompson said quietly, pulling Danny aside. "What exactly did you see that made you stop this guy?" Danny lowered his voice. He was driving slowly through the neighborhood, looking around. It seemed suspicious. Driving slowly and looking around? That's it? "Well, yeah, and the tinted windows, and he's in a nice car, and what?" Thompson's voice was getting harder. Danny realized he was digging himself into a deeper hole. "Look, Sarge, I've got good instincts about these things. This guy doesn't belong in this neighborhood." Thompson stared at Danny for a long moment. "Doesn't belong? What do you mean by that?" Before Danny could answer, Officer Martinez spoke up. "Excuse me, sir," she said to Thomas. "Could I see your driver's license again?" Thomas handed it over politely. Martinez looked at the address and then at the street signs around them. "You live just a few blocks from here," she observed. "Yes, ma'am. For about 8 years now." Martinez handed the license back to Thomas, then walked over to Thompson and Danny. "Sarge, this man lives in this neighborhood. His license is clean, no warrants, no criminal history. I'm not understanding the probable cause here." Danny was getting angry at being questioned by a rookie. "Martinez, you don't know what you're talking about. I've been doing this job since you were in high school." "That's enough," Thompson said sharply. "Martinez is asking legitimate questions." Thompson walked back to Thomas, studying him more carefully this time. The man was clearly educated, well-spoken, and professionally dressed. His car was expensive but not flashy, and his behavior had been nothing but respectful throughout the entire encounter. "Sir, I apologize for the extended detention," Thompson said. "Can you tell me exactly what Officer Brooks told you when he pulled you over?" Thomas remained calm and factual. "He said I was driving suspiciously slowly. When I asked what law I had broken, he couldn't specify one. He demanded my license and registration, which I provided. Then he ordered me out of the car and claimed he smelled marijuana, which was false. I clearly stated that I did not consent to a search, but he searched my car anyway." Thompson nodded. Everything Thomas said matched what he was observing at the scene. The man's story was consistent, his behavior was appropriate, and there was no evidence of any crime. "Did you record any of this interaction?" Thompson asked. Thomas held up his phone. "Yes, sir. I started recording when Officer Brooks began the illegal search." Danny stepped forward angrily. "He's been recording us the whole time, trying to make us look bad." "Actually," Martinez said quietly, "citizens have the right to record police interactions in public. It's legal and protected by the First Amendment." Danny glared at the rookie officer. He couldn't believe she was taking the suspect's side against a fellow cop. Thompson was getting a clearer picture of what had happened. This looked like a textbook case of racial profiling followed by an illegal search, the kind of case that ended careers and cost the city millions in lawsuits. "Brooks, step over here," Thompson ordered. The two men walked away from Thomas and Martinez, but they weren't far enough away to avoid being overheard. "Are you out of your mind?" Thompson whispered harshly. "You pulled over a guy for driving carefully? You searched his car without consent or probable cause? Do you have any idea what kind of trouble you're in?" "Sarge, I know what I saw." What you saw was a black man in a nice car and you decided he didn't belong in this neighborhood. That's what you saw. Danny's mouth fell open. It wasn't about what, Brooks, his race? Because from where I'm standing, that's exactly what this looks like. Meanwhile, Officer Martinez was trying to make Thomas more comfortable. Sir, I want you to know that this kind of treatment doesn't represent how most officers conduct themselves. What happened here tonight was wrong. Thomas appreciated her honesty, but he was tired and frustrated. Officer Martinez, this isn't the first time something like this has happened to me. I've been pulled over for driving while black more times than I can count. Martinez felt sick to her stomach. She'd joined the police force to serve and protect people, not to harass innocent citizens. Seeing Danny's behavior was opening her eyes to problems within law enforcement that she'd only read about in training manuals. I'm going to make sure this gets reported properly, she promised Thomas. You shouldn't have to go through this. Thompson walked back over to Thomas, his face serious but respectful. Sir, I need to ask you directly, do you want to file a formal complaint about Officer Brooks's conduct tonight? Thomas looked at Danny, who was standing nearby with his arms crossed and an angry expression on his face. Then he looked at Martinez, who seemed genuinely concerned about justice. Finally, he looked at Thompson, who appeared to be a fair supervisor trying to do the right thing. Yes, Thomas said firmly. I want to file a formal complaint. What happened here tonight was illegal, unprofessional, and discriminatory. This officer violated my constitutional rights and I want it documented. Danny's face went pale. A formal complaint would mean an internal investigation, interviews, paperwork, and possible disciplinary action. His record had already been questionable lately, and this could be the final straw. But Thomas wasn't finished. He looked directly at Thompson and said something that would change everything. Sergeant, I think you should know who you're dealing with here. I'm not just another citizen filing a complaint. Thompson raised an eyebrow. What do you mean, sir? Thomas reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his business card. The card was elegant and official-looking, with the city seal prominently displayed at the top. As Thompson read the card, his expression changed from confusion to shock to barely concealed panic. The card read, Thomas Washington, Mayor, City of Riverside. Sergeant Thompson stared at the business card in his hand like it was a live bomb. The words seemed to blur together as his brain tried to process what he was seeing. Mayor Thomas Washington, the same Thomas Washington who signed his paychecks. The same Thomas Washington who'd been fighting for police reform in city council meetings for the past 2 years. Thompson's hands started to shake slightly as the full weight of the situation hit him. This wasn't just a bad traffic stop. This wasn't just an illegal search. This was a career-ending disaster for everyone involved. Oh no, Thompson whispered under his breath. Oh no. Officer Martinez noticed Thompson's sudden change in demeanor. Sarge, is everything okay? Thompson couldn't speak. He just held out the business card for Martinez to see. She took it and read it carefully, her eyes growing wide with shock. Mayor, she whispered. He's the mayor? Danny was still standing a few feet away, trying to listen to their conversation. He couldn't hear exactly what they were saying, but he could see their faces, and he didn't like what he was seeing. Thompson looked like he'd seen a ghost, and Martinez looked terrified. What's going on? Danny demanded, walking over to them. Thompson handed him the business card without saying a word. Danny looked down at it and felt his stomach drop to his shoes. The card seemed to grow heavier in his hands as he read the name over and over again. This can't be right, Danny said, his voice cracking. This has to be fake. It's not fake, Thomas said calmly from behind them. I can provide additional identification if you need it. Danny spun around to face Thomas, his face now completely drained of color. You're really the mayor? Yes, I am. Danny felt like the world was spinning around him. The mayor. He'd illegally searched the mayor's car. He'd detained the mayor without cause. He'd treated the mayor like a criminal. Why didn't you tell me? Danny asked desperately. Thomas's expression remained calm but firm. I shouldn't have to announce my job title to avoid being harassed by police. Every citizen deserves to be treated with respect and dignity, regardless of their position or status. Thompson stepped forward, trying to take control of the situation. Mr. Mayor, I sincerely apologize for what happened here tonight. This behavior is completely unacceptable and does not represent the values of our police department, doesn't it? Thomas asked quietly. Because from where I'm standing, this looks exactly like what many citizens in our community experience on a regular basis. The only difference is that I have a business card that changes how you're treating me." Martinez felt sick to her stomach. She'd witnessed a clear case of racial profiling, and now she was learning that it had happened to the most powerful person in their city. But Thomas was right. This kind of treatment shouldn't depend on someone's job title or social status. Danny was starting to panic. His mind was racing through all the possible consequences. He'd already been written up twice this year for excessive force complaints. His supervisor had warned him that one more incident would result in termination. And now this. "Look, I made a mistake," Danny said, his voice shaking. "I'm sorry, okay? I didn't know who you were." "That's exactly the problem," Thomas replied. "You didn't care who I was when you thought I was just another black man in a nice car. You made assumptions based on my race, not on my behavior." Thompson was trying to figure out how to minimize the damage, but he knew it was already too late. This story would be front-page news by tomorrow morning. The police department would be under investigation. His own job was probably in jeopardy for not properly supervising his officers. "Mr. Mayor," Thompson said carefully, "what can we do to make this right?" Thomas looked at all three officers. Danny was clearly panicking. Thompson was desperately trying to control the situation, and Martinez looked genuinely disturbed by what she'd witnessed. "You can start by treating every citizen the way you're treating me right now," Thomas said, "with respect and dignity. You can acknowledge that what happened here was wrong and illegal, and you can make sure it never happens again." Danny was sweating now, despite the cool evening air. "Sir, I really am sorry. I was just doing my job, trying to keep the neighborhood safe." "No, you weren't," Thomas said firmly. "You were profiling me based on my race. You pulled me over because you decided I didn't belong in your neighborhood. You violated my constitutional rights because you thought I was powerless to fight back." The words hit Danny like punches. Every accusation was true, and they all knew it. Martinez spoke up quietly. "Mr. Mayor, I want you to know that I'll testify to what I saw here tonight. This was wrong, and I won't be part of covering it up." Thompson shot her a warning look, but Martinez didn't back down. She'd sworn an oath to uphold the law and protect citizens, not to protect corrupt cops who violated people's rights. Thomas nodded appreciatively at Martinez. "Thank you, officer. Your integrity means a lot." Danny felt more isolated by the minute. Even his backup was turning against him. "Martinez, you don't understand the full situation." "I understand perfectly," Martinez interrupted. "I understand that you pulled over an innocent man without probable cause, searched his car illegally, and detained him for over 30 minutes based on nothing but racial bias." Thompson was getting more nervous as the conversation continued. Every word was potentially being recorded, and everything they said could be used against them later. "Mr. Mayor," Thompson tried again, "perhaps we could discuss this matter privately back at the station." "No," Thomas said firmly. "This happened in public, and it will be addressed publicly. I won't be swept under the rug or handled quietly in some backroom deal." Danny made one last desperate attempt to save himself. "Sir, please, I've got kids to feed. I can't lose this job. Can't we work something out?" Thomas looked at Danny with a mixture of sadness and disappointment. "Officer Brooks, you should have thought about your children before you decided to violate an innocent citizen's rights. Actions have consequences." The street was quiet except for the sound of radio chatter from the police cars. A few neighbors had come out of their houses to see what was happening, drawn by the flashing lights and commotion. Thomas looked around at the growing crowd of onlookers. Many of them were his constituents, people who'd voted for him, people who trusted him to lead their city. They were watching their mayor being treated like a criminal by the very police officers he was supposed to supervise. "Sergeant Thompson," Thomas said formally, "I want all three of your officers' names and badge numbers documented. I want copies of any dash cam or body camera footage from tonight's incident. And I want a formal investigation opened immediately." Thompson nodded reluctantly. "Yes, sir. Of course. Furthermore," Thomas continued, "I'll be calling an emergency city council meeting to discuss this incident and its implications for police reform in our city." Danny felt like he was watching his career die in slow motion. Everything was falling apart, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. But the worst part was that Thomas was right about everything. Danny had profiled him. Danny had violated his rights. Danny had assumed that a black man in a nice car didn't belong in that neighborhood. As the reality of his actions sank in, Danny realized that he'd not only destroyed his own career, he'd also given ammunition to everyone who claimed the police department was racist and corrupt. The damage was done, and there was no going back. Sergeant Thompson's mind was racing as he tried to figure out how to contain this disaster. In 20 years of police work, he'd never faced anything quite like this. He'd seen officers make mistakes before, but illegally searching the mayor's car was in a category all by itself. "Mr. Mayor," Thompson said, clearing his throat nervously, "perhaps we could wrap this up quickly and move forward in a more constructive manner." Thomas raised an eyebrow. "Wrap this up quickly? Sergeant, are you suggesting we pretend this didn't happen?" "No, sir, not at all. I just meant that we could handle this through proper channels internally, without making a big public spectacle." "A spectacle?" Thomas's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. "Is that what you call it when a citizen's constitutional rights are violated?" Officer Martinez was watching this conversation with growing alarm. She could see that Thompson was trying to minimize what had happened, just like Danny was trying to justify it. Neither approach sat well with her. Danny, meanwhile, was becoming more desperate by the minute. The full weight of his situation was sinking in, and he was grasping at any excuse he could find. "Look, Mr. Mayor," Danny said, stepping forward. "I was just doing my job. I was following proper procedures. I mean, you have to understand we get training that tells us to be suspicious of certain situations." Thomas turned to face Danny directly. "What kind of training tells you to be suspicious of a black man driving legally in his own neighborhood?" Danny's face flushed red. "It's not about race, sir. It's about behavior patterns and crime statistics and—" "Stop," Thomas said firmly. "Just stop. We both know what this was about. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending otherwise." Thompson quickly intervened, sensing that Danny was making things worse. "Brooks, maybe you should wait by your patrol car while I handle this." But Danny couldn't let it go. His career was on the line, and he felt like he had to defend himself. "Mr. Mayor, you have to understand the position we're in out here. We're trying to protect people, and sometimes we have to make tough decisions based on limited information." Limited information. Thomas's patience was wearing thin. "You had my driver's license. You had my registration. You had proof that I live in this neighborhood. What other information did you need?" "Well, I mean..." Danny was stumbling over his words. Officer Martinez couldn't stay silent any longer. "Officer Brooks, you told me earlier that this man didn't belong in this neighborhood. Those were your exact words. How is that not about race?" Danny spun around to face Martinez, his eyes blazing with anger. "Martinez, you don't know what you're talking about. You've been on the force for 5 minutes. You don't understand how things work." "I understand right from wrong," Martinez shot back. And this was wrong. Thompson was losing control of the situation. His officers were arguing in front of the mayor, neighbors were gathering to watch, and everything was being recorded. This was turning into a public relations nightmare. "Everyone just calm down," Thompson ordered. "Let's handle this professionally." Thomas pulled out his phone and started making a call. "I'm calling Chief Patricia Foster. She needs to know what happened here tonight." Danny's face went white. Chief Foster was known for her zero-tolerance policy on police misconduct. If she got involved, his career was definitely over. "Mr. Mayor, please," Danny begged. "Can't we work this out between us?" "I'll do whatever you want. I'll take extra training, I'll write a formal apology, anything." Thomas paused his dialing and looked at Danny. "Officer Brooks, do you think this is the first time something like this has happened to me? Do you think I'm the only black man in this city who's been pulled over for no reason?" Danny didn't answer. "I guarantee you that somewhere in this city right now, another officer is pulling over another black man for the crime of driving while black. The only difference is that other man doesn't have a business card that makes you suddenly respectful." The truth of those words hit everyone present. Thomas was right. This kind of thing happened all the time, but most victims didn't have the power or platform to fight back. Thompson tried one more time to control the narrative. "Mr. Mayor, I want you to know that Officer Brooks's actions tonight do not represent the standards of our department. We take these matters very seriously, and we will conduct a thorough investigation." "Will you?" Thomas asked. "Because my experience with police investigations is that they tend to find that officers were following procedure or acting within policy guidelines. How will this investigation be different?" Thompson didn't have a good answer for that question. Meanwhile, Danny was still trying to save his career. "Sir, I've been thinking about what you said, and you're right. I made assumptions I shouldn't have made. But I'm not a racist person. I have black friends, and I— Don't, Thomas said sharply. Don't give me that speech. Your actions tonight spoke louder than any words you could say right now. Officer Martinez was disgusted by Danny's attempts to minimize his behavior. Officer Brooks, you spent 30 minutes illegally searching this man's car because you decided he didn't belong in his own neighborhood. How is that not racist? Danny turned on Martinez angrily. You know what your problem is, Martinez? You're too naive to understand how policing really works. Sometimes you have to go with your gut instincts. Your gut instincts told you to harass an innocent man because of his race, Martinez replied. Maybe your instincts are the problem. Thomas finished dialing Chief Foster's number. Chief Foster? This is Mayor Washington. I need you to come to the corner of Maple Street and 3rd Avenue immediately. We have a situation that requires your personal attention. As Thomas spoke to the chief, Danny felt the last of his hope slipping away. Chief Foster was not someone who tolerated misconduct, and she definitely wouldn't tolerate an incident involving the mayor. Thompson was running through damage control scenarios in his head. Maybe they could claim it was a misunderstanding. Maybe they could say Danny was following up on a legitimate complaint. Maybe they could argue that the search was legal based on some technicality. But deep down, Thompson knew none of those excuses would work. The evidence was clear, the witnesses were reliable, and the victim was the most powerful person in the city government. Chief Foster will be here in 10 minutes, Thomas announced after ending his call. Danny slumped against his patrol car. 10 minutes. In 10 minutes, Chief Foster would arrive, assess the situation, and probably end his career on the spot. Officer Martinez walked over to Thomas. Mr. Mayor, I want you to know that I'll provide a complete and honest report about what I witnessed tonight. Officer Brooks violated your rights and he needs to be held accountable. Thomas nodded appreciatively. Thank you, Officer Martinez. Your integrity gives me hope that not all officers are like Officer Brooks. Thompson shot Martinez another warning look, but she ignored him. She'd rather lose her job for telling the truth than keep it by covering up misconduct. As they waited for the chief to arrive, word of the incident began to spread. Thomas could see people in nearby houses looking out their windows and taking pictures with their phones. By morning, this story would be all over social media. Danny made one final desperate plea. Mr. Mayor, please. I know I messed up, but I've got a family to think about. My wife just had a baby and we can't afford for me to lose this job. Isn't there some way we can handle this quietly? Thomas looked at Danny with a mixture of pity and frustration. Officer Brooks, every person you've ever illegally stopped or searched probably had a family too. They had bills to pay and responsibilities to meet just like you do, but that didn't stop you from treating them like criminals. But this is different, Danny started to say. No. Thomas interrupted. It's not different. The only difference is that you got caught violating the rights of someone who has the power to hold you accountable. In the distance, they could see another set of flashing lights approaching. Chief Foster was on her way, and with her arrival, the real reckoning would begin. The damage control attempts had failed. There was no containing the story, no minimizing the impact, and no way to make it quietly disappear. Officer Danny Brooks had illegally searched the mayor's car, and now the whole city was about to find out about it. Chief Patricia Foster's police car pulled up with authority, and she stepped out like she owned the street. At 52 years old, she was a commanding presence with short gray hair, sharp eyes, and a reputation for being tougher than most of the men under her command. She'd worked her way up through every rank in the department and had zero patience for officers who brought shame to the badge. Foster surveyed the scene quickly, taking in the 3 officers, the expensive Mercedes, and the well-dressed black man who she immediately recognized as the mayor. Her expression grew darker with each detail she observed. Someone better start talking, Foster said, her voice carrying the weight of 25 years in law enforcement, and it better be the truth. Sergeant Thompson stepped forward nervously. Chief, we had a routine traffic stop that got a little complicated. Complicated? Foster cut him off. Thompson, when the mayor calls me personally at 9:30 at night, it's not complicated. It's a disaster. Now tell me what really happened. Thomas stepped forward before Thompson could spin the story. Chief Foster, I was driving home from a city council meeting when Officer Brooks pulled me over without probable cause. He then illegally searched my vehicle despite my clear refusal to consent. I was detained for over 30 minutes while he violated my Fourth Amendment rights. Foster's jaw tightened as she listened. This was every police chief's worst nightmare. One of her officers had illegally searched the mayor's car. The political fallout alone would be devastating, never mind the legal and civil rights implications. "Is this true, Thompson?" Foster asked, her voice dangerously quiet. Thompson glanced at Danny, who was standing by his patrol car looking like he wanted to disappear. "Chief, there may have been some procedural issues with how the stop was conducted." "Procedural issues?" Foster's voice rose. "Thompson, did Officer Brooks search the mayor's car without consent or probable cause?" The sergeant was trapped between loyalty to his officer and loyalty to the truth. "Yes, ma'am, he did." Foster closed her eyes and took a deep breath. When she opened them again, they were blazing with anger. "Brooks, get over here now." Danny walked over slowly like a man heading to his own execution. His hands were shaking, and his face was pale with sweat. "Officer Brooks," Foster said, her voice like ice, "explain to me how you decided it was a good idea to illegally search the mayor's vehicle." Danny's mouth opened and closed several times before any words came out. "Chief, I thought I smelled marijuana and he was acting suspicious." "Stop lying to me," Foster snapped. "I can smell lies from a mile away, and yours stink worse than a garbage dump." "Try again." Danny looked around desperately for support but found none. Thompson was avoiding eye contact. Martinez was staring at him with disgust, and Thomas was watching him with calm disappointment. I made a mistake," Danny admitted quietly. "A mistake?" Foster's voice could have cut glass. "Breaking department policy is a mistake. Forgetting to file paperwork is a mistake. Violating a citizen's constitutional rights is not a mistake, it's a crime." Officer Martinez stepped forward. "Chief, I witnessed the entire interaction. Officer Brooks clearly engaged in racial profiling and conducted an illegal search. Mr. Washington repeatedly stated he did not consent to the search, but Officer Brooks ignored him." Foster nodded approvingly at Martinez. At least one of her officers still had integrity. Thomas pulled out his phone and showed it to Foster. "Chief, I recorded most of the interaction. The evidence is clear and documented." Foster looked at the phone, knowing that whatever was on that recording would probably end up on the evening news. "Mr. Mayor, I need you to know that this behavior does not represent the values I've tried to instill in this department." "Chief Foster," Thomas replied respectfully, "I've known you for years and I respect your leadership. But we both know this isn't an isolated incident. This is part of a larger pattern of bias in policing that affects citizens across our community every day." Foster knew Thomas was right. She'd been fighting against racism and corruption in her own department for years. But cases like this showed how much work still needed to be done. "Brooks," Foster said, turning back to the disgraced officer, "you are suspended without pay, effective immediately. You will surrender your badge and weapon to Sergeant Thompson. You are not to set foot on department property or contact any city officials while the investigation is ongoing." Danny felt the words hit him like physical blows. "Chief, please, I'm not finished," Foster continued. "There will be a full internal affairs investigation. There will be a federal civil rights investigation. And there will probably be criminal charges filed against you for violating Mr. Washington's constitutional rights under color of law." Danny's legs nearly gave out. Criminal charges meant he could go to prison. It meant his career in law enforcement was over forever. It meant his family would lose their home, their health insurance, everything. "Chief," Danny pleaded one last time, "I made a mistake, but I don't deserve to have my whole life destroyed." Thomas spoke up quietly. "Officer Brooks, do you think the dozens of innocent people you've illegally stopped and searched over the years deserve to have their dignity destroyed? Do you think they deserve to be humiliated and violated because of your biases?" Danny couldn't answer that question. Foster turned to Thompson. "Sergeant, you were Brooks's supervisor. You knew about his pattern of questionable stops and you failed to address it properly. You're being demoted to patrol officer, effective immediately." Thompson's face went white. A demotion would cost him thousands of dollars in salary and benefits, and it would probably end any chance he had of advancing further in his career. "Chief, you failed in your duty to supervise your officers properly," Foster said. "This incident happened on your watch under your command. You bear responsibility for Brooks's actions." Officer Martinez watched as her colleagues faced the consequences of their actions. She felt sick about what had happened, but also relieved that the truth was finally coming out. Foster turned to Thomas. Mr. Mayor, on behalf of the entire police department, I formally apologize for what happened to you tonight. Officer Brooks's actions were illegal, immoral, and completely contrary to everything we claim to stand for. Thomas nodded. Thank you, Chief. But I want you to understand that I'm not looking for special treatment because of my position. I want the same justice that any citizen would deserve in this situation. You'll get it, Foster promised. And I want you to know that I'll be implementing immediate reforms to prevent this kind of incident from happening again. What kind of reforms? Thomas asked. Mandatory bias training for all officers, body cameras that cannot be turned off, stricter oversight of traffic stops, and immediate termination for any officer found to have engaged in racial profiling. Thomas was impressed by Foster's quick response, but he also knew that real change would take time and sustained effort. Chief Foster, I appreciate your commitment to reform, but I also want you to know that I'll be proposing legislation to create an independent civilian oversight board for police misconduct complaints. Foster nodded. She didn't like the idea of outside oversight, but she understood that her department had lost the public's trust and needed to earn it back. As the conversation continued, Danny stood by his patrol car, slowly removing his badge and unholstering his weapon. 20 years of police work were ending in disgrace and shame. He thought about all the stops he'd made over the years, all the people he'd hassled based on nothing more than their race or appearance. He'd told himself he was keeping the community safe, but now he realized he'd been the danger all along. Officer Martinez watched Danny surrender his badge and felt a mixture of sadness and relief. Sadness that it had come to this, but relief that a corrupt officer was finally being held accountable. The reckoning had arrived, and there was no escaping the consequences of 20 years of illegal and discriminatory policing. Justice, it seemed, had finally caught up with Officer Danny Brooks. By 6 a.m, the story was everywhere. Local news stations led with it. Social media was buzzing with outrage, and Thomas's phone hadn't stopped ringing since dawn. The headline on Channel 7 News read, "Shocking. Mayor illegally searched during traffic stop. Officer suspended." Thomas sat in his home office, still wearing the same suit from the night before, watching the coverage with a mixture of exhaustion and determination. The video from his phone had been shared thousands of times overnight, showing Danny Brooks searching his Mercedes while he calmly explained that he did not consent to the search. His wife, Dr. Angela Washington, brought him a cup of coffee and sat down beside him. "How are you holding up?" she asked, concern evident in her voice. "I'm fine," Thomas replied. But they both knew that wasn't entirely true. Being treated like a criminal in his own neighborhood had been humiliating and exhausting. "I just keep thinking about all the people this has happened to, who don't have a platform to fight back." On television, reporter Jennifer Chen was standing outside City Hall. The incident has sparked renewed calls for police reform in Riverside, with community leaders demanding immediate action to address racial profiling in traffic stops. The phone rang again. Thomas's assistant, Michael Rodriguez, was fielding hundreds of calls from reporters, civil rights organizations, and concerned citizens. The mayor's office had become the epicenter of a growing movement for police accountability. At the police station, Officer Lisa Martinez arrived for her shift to find protesters already gathering outside. Signs reading, "Justice for all citizens" and "End racial profiling now" covered the front steps. She made her way through the crowd, feeling the weight of what she'd witnessed the night before. Inside the station, the atmosphere was tense. Officers clustered in small groups, whispering about the incident and what it might mean for all of them. Some were angry that Danny had brought shame to the department. Others were worried about increased scrutiny of their own practices. Chief Foster called an emergency meeting for all patrol officers. She stood at the front of the briefing room, her expression serious and determined. "I know you've all seen the news coverage," she began. "What happened last night was unacceptable and will not be tolerated in this department. Officer Brooks violated every principle we claim to uphold." A veteran officer in the back raised his hand. "Chief, are we going to let politicians and protesters dictate how we do our jobs?" Foster's eyes narrowed. "Officer Williams, our job is to protect and serve all citizens equally, regardless of their race. If you have a problem with that basic concept, you're in the wrong profession." Meanwhile, at Riverside Community College, Professor David Kim was showing the video to his criminal justice class. The students watched in stunned silence as Danny Brooks searched Thomas's car, despite clear statements that consent was not given. This is why body cameras and civilian oversight matter, Professor Kim explained. Without that video evidence, it would be the mayor's word against the officer's word, and historically, officers' accounts have been believed over citizens' accounts. A student raised her hand. Professor Kim, what would have happened if this was just a regular person and not the mayor? That's exactly the question we need to ask, Kim replied. Would Officer Brooks be suspended if he'd done this to someone without political power? Would there be federal investigations and reform discussions? Back at City Hall, Thomas was preparing for an emergency city council meeting. Council members were arriving early, knowing that the eyes of the entire community would be on them. Councilwoman Rosa Martinez, no relation to Officer Martinez, approached Thomas in the hallway. Tom, I'm so sorry about what happened to you. But I have to ask, are you sure you want to push for these reforms right now? Some people are saying you should focus on healing rather than fighting. Thomas looked at her with disappointment. Rosa, if I don't fight for change now, when will I? How many more citizens need to be illegally stopped and searched before we act? The council chamber filled quickly with standing room only. Community leaders, civil rights activists, concerned citizens, and reporters packed every available space. The energy in the room was electric with anger and hope. Thomas called the meeting to order and got straight to the point. Last night I experienced firsthand what too many of our citizens face regularly: illegal detention and racial profiling by police officers. Today we're going to discuss concrete steps to ensure this never happens again. Reverend James Williams from the First Baptist Church stood up to speak. Mayor Washington, our community has been dealing with police harassment for decades. Young black men in our neighborhoods get stopped for no reason other than the color of their skin. This has to stop. Maria Gonzalez, a local business owner, shared her own story. My teenage son was stopped 3 times last month walking home from school. 3 times. He wasn't doing anything wrong, but officers kept saying he matched a description of someone they were looking for. The stories kept coming. Parent after parent, citizen after citizen, sharing experiences of being pulled over, searched, and humiliated by officers who assumed they were criminals based on their appearance. Officer Martinez, who was attending the meeting on her own time, listened to these accounts with growing horror. She'd thought Danny's behavior toward the mayor was an isolated incident, but clearly it was part of a much larger pattern. Thomas listened to each story with careful attention, taking notes and asking follow-up questions. He could see the pain and frustration in people's faces, the exhaustion of dealing with constant harassment and discrimination. Thank you all for sharing your experiences, Thomas said when the public comment period ended. Your courage in speaking out is what makes change possible. He then outlined his proposed reforms: mandatory body cameras that couldn't be turned off, civilian oversight of police misconduct complaints, regular bias training for all officers, and strict consequences for racial profiling. Councilman Robert Johnson, who had always been supportive of police, looked uncomfortable. Mayor Washington, while I sympathize with what happened to you, we need to be careful not to handcuff our officers. They need to be able to do their jobs effectively. Councilman Johnson, Thomas replied firmly, an officer's job is to protect citizens' rights, not violate them. If following the Constitution handcuffs police work, then we're doing police work wrong. The vote was closer than Thomas had hoped, but his reforms passed by a margin of 5-3. It was a victory, but he knew the real work was just beginning. After the meeting, Thomas found Officer Martinez waiting for him in the hallway. She looked nervous but determined. Mr. Mayor, she said, I wanted you to know that what I witnessed last night opened my eyes to problems in our department that I didn't fully understand before. I want to help make sure this kind of thing never happens again. Thomas was moved by her sincerity. Officer Martinez, your integrity last night gave me hope that change is possible. We need more officers like you. As Thomas walked to his car that evening, he noticed a small group of protesters still gathered outside City Hall. They were holding candles and singing quietly, their signs reading, "Justice and dignity for all." One of the protesters, an elderly black woman, approached him. Mayor Washington, thank you for fighting for us. My grandson was stopped by police 5 times this year, and he's only 16. Maybe now things will change. Thomas felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about what had happened to him anymore. It was about creating a community where every citizen could drive home from work without fear of being harassed by the very people sworn to protect them. The public revelation had sparked a movement, but Thomas knew that real change would require sustained effort, political courage, and the commitment of citizens who refused to accept the status quo. The fight for justice was just beginning. 6 months later, Officer Danny Brooks sat in a federal courthouse wearing a gray suit instead of his police uniform. The courtroom was packed with reporters, community members, and civil rights advocates who had followed his case from the beginning. The federal prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Sarah Kim, stood before the judge with a stack of evidence that had grown far beyond that single night on Maple Street. The investigation into Brooks' conduct had uncovered dozens of similar incidents: traffic stops without cause, illegal searches, and a clear pattern of racial profiling that stretched back years. "Your Honor," Prosecutor Kim said, "the evidence shows that Mr. Brooks systematically violated the constitutional rights of citizens based on their race. This wasn't a single mistake or a moment of poor judgment. This was a pattern of discriminatory policing that undermined the public trust and violated federal civil rights laws." Brooks's lawyer tried to argue for leniency, claiming his client was following department training and culture, but the evidence was overwhelming. Video testimony from dozens of victims, statistical analysis of his traffic stops, and his own recorded statements all painted a clear picture of deliberate discrimination. When the judge announced the sentence, 2 years in federal prison plus 3 years of supervised probation, Brooks felt his legs give out. His wife, sitting in the gallery behind him, started crying quietly. His children would grow up with their father in prison, branded as a criminal himself. Thomas Washington, sitting in the back of the courtroom, felt no satisfaction in Brooks's downfall. This wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability and making sure no other citizen would suffer what he and so many others had experienced. After the hearing, Thomas spoke to reporters on the courthouse steps. "Today's verdict sends a clear message that no one is above the law, including law enforcement officers. But our work isn't finished. Real change requires more than just punishing individual officers. It requires transforming entire systems. And that transformation was already underway in Riverside. The reforms Thomas had pushed through the city council 6 months earlier were showing real results. Traffic stops were down 30%. Complaints against officers had dropped dramatically, and community trust was slowly beginning to rebuild. Officer Lisa Martinez had become a key part of that rebuilding effort. She'd been promoted to sergeant and was now running the department's new community policing division. Her job was to build relationships between officers and residents, especially in communities that had been over-policed and underserved. "We're not just changing policies," Martinez explained to a group of new recruits during training. "We're changing culture. Every interaction you have with a citizen is an opportunity to build trust or destroy it. The choice is yours." The body cameras that all officers now wore had changed behavior dramatically. When officers knew their actions were being recorded, they were much more likely to follow proper procedures and treat citizens with respect. Chief Foster had used the crisis as an opportunity to clean house. 3 other officers with patterns of misconduct had been fired, and several supervisors who had failed to address problematic behavior had been demoted or reassigned. "Leadership means taking responsibility," Foster told a police management conference in the state capitol. "When officers under your command violate citizens' rights, you bear responsibility for creating the culture that allowed it to happen." The civilian oversight board that Thomas had pushed for was also making a difference. Chaired by retired federal judge Patricia Coleman, the board provided independent investigation of police misconduct complaints and had the power to recommend discipline and policy changes. Judge Coleman, a respected African-American jurist, had seen decades of police misconduct cases. "The key to effective oversight," she said, "is independence from the department being investigated. Citizens need to know that their complaints will be heard fairly and investigated thoroughly." But perhaps the most important change was happening in the community itself. Citizens who had once felt powerless to challenge police misconduct were now coming forward with their stories and demanding accountability. Maria Gonzalez, the business owner whose son had been repeatedly stopped, was now serving on the Civilian Oversight Board. When Mayor Washington shared his experience, it gave the rest of us permission to speak up too, she said. We realized we didn't have to accept harassment as normal. The financial settlement in Thomas's federal lawsuit had been substantial, $25 million, but he had donated every penny to organizations working on criminal justice reform. The money funded legal aid clinics, police accountability training, and educational programs about citizens' rights. Money can't undo what happened, Thomas explained at the donation ceremony, but it can help prevent it from happening to others. Thomas had also become a national voice on police reform, speaking at conferences and working with other mayors to share successful strategies. His experience had given him credibility that policy experts and academics sometimes lacked. He had lived through the very problems he was trying to solve. Too often, people in positions of power don't understand the daily indignities that ordinary citizens face, Thomas told a gathering of mayors in Washington, D.C. Sometimes it takes a personal experience to open our eyes to systemic problems that have existed for decades. The ripple effects of that night on Maple Street continued to spread. Other cities began adopting similar reforms. Civil rights organizations used the case as a model for holding police accountable, and law schools began teaching it as an example of how one incident could catalyze broader change. Officer Martinez, now Sergeant Martinez, often reflected on how witnessing Brooks's misconduct had changed her own approach to policing. She'd become an advocate for reform within the department, pushing colleagues to examine their own biases and treat every citizen with dignity and respect. I could have stayed silent that night, she told a group of young officers during a training session. I could have gone along with the cover-up and protected a fellow officer. But I took an oath to uphold the Constitution and protect citizens' rights. That oath doesn't have exceptions based on someone's race or social status. 2 years after Brooks began serving his sentence, Thomas was re-elected as mayor by the largest margin in the city's history. His approval rating among all racial groups had increased significantly, as citizens saw him as someone who would fight for their rights regardless of the political consequences. During his victory speech, Thomas reflected on how much had changed since that night when he was pulled over for driving while black in his own neighborhood. 2 years ago, I experienced something that too many of our citizens have endured for too long, he said to the cheering crowd. But out of that injustice came an opportunity to build a better, more equitable community for everyone. The reforms were working, but Thomas knew the work was never finished. Changing hearts and minds was harder than changing policies, and it required constant vigilance to prevent backsliding. As he drove home after the victory celebration, Thomas took the same route he'd been taking that fateful night 2 years earlier. But now, instead of dreading police encounters, he felt hopeful about the future. The streetlights illuminated Maple Street just as they had before, but everything else had changed. Citizens could drive home without fear. Officers could take pride in serving their community with integrity. And justice had finally caught up with those who had abused their power. It had taken a mayor being illegally searched for the community to wake up to problems that had existed for decades. But sometimes, Thomas reflected, it takes a crisis to create the opportunity for real change. And in Riverside, real change had finally come.